My wife found me in our condo in the city, and I was like underneath a blanket, curled up in a ball, struggling, crying. And she called my parents. And luckily she did. And my parents came down. It was like 2 a.m. And that's kind of when they saw it for the first time.
Welcome to the Ill Noise Business Playbook. We sit down with people building real impact in their communities and unpack the vision behind their work. If you care about real stories and real connection, you're in the right place. Let's make some noise. All right, welcome to the Ill Noise Business Playbook. Please make sure you're following us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And if you have not subscribed yet to the YouTube channel, please do so. It allows us to kind of keep moving forward. We've got Jim here with the Maley Way. Jim, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good, Joe. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, Jim. I have had an absolute pleasure following not only you, but some others that you're connected with on social media, specifically Instagram. So we'll kind of cover some of those things. But in particular, I would love the audience to get to know what the Maley Way is all about. So the floor is yours, my friend. Please explain what you're doing.
Yeah. So basically what it's all about is kind of trying to raise awareness around mental health, reduce the stigma around mental health. And, initially it started as more of a public speaking platform. And it still is. That's kind of like the main thing, but it kind of has evolved into podcasting. And it's evolved into a mental health podcast that I do with different individuals who have overcome their struggles. It has evolved into me and my wife, like a kind of husband-wife podcast that I really like doing, and I think she does too. And I think it's been good for our relationship, and people seem to enjoy that one. It's a little more lighthearted. And then it's also evolved into like my son and his buddy, it's kind of funny that like, what we were talking about is that's the thing that's really, really blowing up. But what's cool about it is it has put more eyes on into what we're doing with mental health. So that's been a great thing as well.
Jim, if you could, I think you have a very important story regarding why mental health is such a priority for you. I told you before we got started, I'm going to see our beloved Chicago White Sox hopefully beat the Dodgers and keep this home winning streak going. But also later on, my wife and I don't live in Chicago. We live out in Algonquin here. So we're going to stay at a hotel because specifically basketball is another one of my passions, something I love very much. And I know it was certainly a priority for you. So if you can tell us a little bit about your mental health journey.
Yeah, it's been a long road that started when I was probably about 18 years old. I was a pretty good basketball player. I wasn't great. I always say that I wasn't great. I was pretty good though.
You don't get scholarships to Northwestern if you're pretty good, but go ahead, Jim. Go ahead.
But I ended up getting some scholarship offers to different schools throughout the country, and I chose to go to Northwestern. As I always say, I wasn't Ivy League smart, or I was Ivy League. I'm sorry, I'm screwing this up, but I always say that I was pretty smart. Could have gone to any of these Ivy League colleges, and I wasn't necessarily Ivy League smart. I was Ivy League basketball player smart. And I chose to go to Northwestern out of that. And it was a pretty big deal, as I always say, because we weren't that good. So it was a pretty big deal to go out and do that. And things were going pretty well. And then all of a sudden, they weren't going well. And I was really struggling. My solution was to just quit basketball. And I did that, and I went into my head coach's office. And the funny part about it, reflecting back now, is he saw it. Like, he knew what was going on. And he mentioned how he had dealt with one of his former players who was dealing with depression. But at that time, like, I just didn't understand that. And to me, what I thought he was telling me was like, you're not mentally tough. And that bothered me because... And he wasn't saying that. He was saying like, you're struggling, man. We can help you. I said, I'm done. And as I was walking out, I always say, he said a line that I thought was pretty funny. He goes, well, I guess you're just a stubborn Irishman. And that was true. I was stubborn. But the reason why I say that is my stubbornness allowed me to get to that point. My stubbornness allowed me to be a good basketball player. But stubbornness caused me not to listen to anyone about this issue for another 10 years. And I think it's one of the reasons why I'm doing it, to help everyone, but specifically like young boys and men who have a hard time coming to grips with something like that. I ended up quitting and I was just a regular student, had a great experience. And I thought all my struggles were done, but unfortunately they weren't. And it all came to kind of a boiling point when my wife found me in our condo in the city. And I was like underneath a blanket, curled up in a ball, struggling, crying. And she called my parents. And luckily she did. And my parents came down. It was like 2 a.m. And that's kind of when they saw it for the first time. And that's when my mom shared her story with mental health and how she was hospitalized when she was 32 years old. And I had never heard any of that before. And I think it was important to hear from someone like that. And that was kind of the impetus that I needed to go get help for the first time. And I did. And I would like to say that it was all rainbows and roses after that. It got better, but things then slipped back. And that's when like the major thing happened for me was I had to take a leave of absence when I was coaching at St. Lawrence. And luckily I got better pretty quickly. They made an adjustment to the medication I was on. I got better pretty quickly, but like here became the dilemma and the turning point in my life. Like, what was I going to say to those kids from the South Side, these tough, hard-nosed kids that I was coaching? And initially I was going to lie. And then my mom she said, "Hey, Jimmy, like there's going to be a boy in that room that hears what you have to say and goes and gets
Absolutely.
help." And sure enough, she was right. Like it was hard. I did it. And like, not only did those kids, those tough kids kind of accept me, they almost rallied around it. And then sure enough, I get a
Yeah.
knock on my office door about a month and a half later, and one of my players comes in and they're really struggling. And we got them the help that we needed. And then I kind of realized like, shoot, I should probably start doing this more to help either students that I'm teaching or athletes that I'm coaching. And then it kind of snowballed into, what I'm doing now.
That, that a lot of times through pain comes purpose, right? And I think you're a great example of that. And I will say, I do share some slight similarities with you, although we both enjoy sports a lot. That's certainly one. But, when I graduated from college, I worked with DCFS kids. And a lot of those kids were coming from the west side and the south side of Chicago. And I remember even thinking right away, like, how am I going to connect with these kids? Obviously, I come from a little bit different background, but I think it's really wonderful what you said. And I hope a lot of people listening to this, a lot of men, a lot of boys are a little fearful of reaching out for help. And I think you are living proof of how beneficial it is when you finally just say enough is enough. And sometimes we have to be alone in rooms crying and our wives need to find us and bring us folks. But if it still brings us to prosperity, I think it's all worth it. Life's a journey, and I think you're doing it very respectfully, and that's
Yeah.
awesome.
Well, yeah. And
You-
I think it's the relatability factor too. Like, I think the sports stuff helps. Also, the fact I'm a pretty big dude. You can't see me
six,
right now. I'm
6'7",
6'7".
right, Jim?
Yeah. So like, I think when kids or anyone sees like a big guy talking
Yeah,
about mental health, I think that adds another layer of kind of buy-in, which has
agreed.
been helpful for me.
Agreed. And with your podcast, you are constantly, it's all mental health related. So you're constantly bringing up different people that you can kind of talk about, obviously what you're doing, but also with your journeys. But it's not just the podcast. You're going to different schools and talking to them, and you've really made this part of who you are and part of your purpose. And I think it's really amazing. I would certainly tell people to follow you, but there's a lot of really great stuff to follow you about. Now, I'm a big fan of Seinfeld, and I
Yeah.
only say that because you seem to be as well, because in your I Love You But podcast that you do with your wife, I hear some Seinfeld music in that and stuff. Can you explain where was the genesis that caused you to kind of go that route? I mean, that's a little bit separate, and you already referenced the fact that you're kind of getting closer with your wife by doing so. I can tell you with confidence, this has brought my wife and I together as well, what we're doing with the Ill Noise, because she's the producer. She's the heart of what we do. She's amazing. I hardly even know how to turn on a computer, so thankfully I have her. But what's the genesis of that? What made you decide to kind of go that route, and how, talk about that, please?
Yeah, well, I was doing the mental health podcast. This guy, Brendan Greeley, who used to be partners with Steve Dahl, and he's a podcast guy.
Steve and Gary from Chicago.
Yes, and he contacted me and he saw what I was doing with the public speaking and he's like, "I think you should do a podcast." And initially it was just me talking like for like 15 episodes, kind of sharing my story. And then I thought about it and I was like, you know what, this might be good to hear from my wife's perspective. So we brought her on. We were sitting in this room like just in like pajamas on this bed that's in here and it just looked awful, but like she was awesome and she was kind of talking about what happened from her perspective and how it affected her. And she does it with like humor and, style. And the podcast producer was like, dude, you got to get her on more. So then we came up with like, we're like, all right, well, what should we do? And I was like, let's do like a Seinfeld airing of grievances, like where you air one grievance, like in Festivus. And
Sure.
oh,
Rest of us for the rest of us.
yeah, and you just air a grievance at the beginning and then it goes into other stuff, whatever, and we'll call it I love you, but. So that's the but. And it's been awesome. Like, I don't know if it's not as big as Henry and Jimmy, but it's been getting pretty big in our area where people listen to it and watch the clips and things like that. And I think a lot of people relate to it, but I do think it is mental health related because I almost think it's like a form of like couples therapy in a way.
Yeah,
Like
for
it's a
sure.
way for us to air our grievance, but do it in like a funny way that we're not going to get like pissed off at each other.
Y- Yeah, it's very, it's respectful, it's playful,
Yeah.
but there's so much love that's being that you see throughout and stuff like that. And as a married man myself, no one can bust our chops like our wives. And
Yes.
may I say, your wife is next level with that. She does a pretty darn good job with that, and it definitely cracks me up.
Yeah.
It's been phenomenal. And again, I can really relate when Neha and I decided to kind of do this. I had, my previous iteration, and I know you know a little bit about my story, but my previous iteration, I was in the corporate world for about 20 plus years and I was traveling constantly. And it was really kind of taking me away from my wife and friends and family and so on and so forth. And by doing this now together, we sort of talk about the guests and then we talk about different ways that we can market it and talk about different ways that we can kind of make an impact. When you do things with your wife, when you have a good positive relationship with your wife, it really just kind of makes your life better. And happy wife, happy life. I know Neha loves this, so I'm going to
Yeah.
keep doing what it's going.
Well, and
Now
I was going to say on top of that, what I've felt like, just like the building of something. And I think you probably get that too. Like you actually see like all the work that you two are doing. You see like how it's building, building, building. And I think there's something rewarding about that building
absolutely.
for yourself and for your family. I think that's cool.
Yeah. And I think we're both in our own ways trying to do something where we're trying to make things better for others. And
Yeah.
I'm older than you, Jim, but what I have found after being in a competitive space where it was kind of like just trying to do something so you can better yourself, it's kind of one of the ways you kind of move up in the corporate world to kind of get out of that and to do something where it's, we realize we're trying to leave the world a better place. As hokey as that sounds, I feel very strongly about that.
Yeah.
All right, I don't want to bury the lead here, but
Yeah.
you and I are great in this format, Jim. But
Yeah.
holy moly, we can learn from some young people. Can you please talk about the now very famous, the very viral Jimmy V and Henry, please?
Yeah. So it, I don't know how to explain it the right way. I'm a teacher and I don't want this to get me in trouble, but I was having beers with a buddy of mine and like Jimmy and Henry were just kept bugging me. They're like, "Hey, we want to do a podcast. We want to do a podcast." And I had done one with Henry before, just joking around. And he was great and I knew he would be awesome. But I wasn't sure about I wasn't sure about my son. I don't want him to hear that, but like I didn't know how he would do, but like they have played off each other so well. But anyways, I just came down to this room and set the equipment up. And I went back upstairs and kept hanging out with my buddy. And I was going to erase it the next day. Like I didn't think anything of it. I came down the next day and I listened to it and watched it. And I was like, my God, this is hilarious. But that said, I didn't think it, like, I was just going to post it for like all my friends and family. And I knew they would think it was funny. And then it just like exploded where like it was getting hundreds of thousands. I think it got like 800,000 views, and then Barstool got on it. Barstool tweeted like, "Hey, here's the new generation Barstool Big Cat." And then like everything I've been posting, like they've had like multiple posts go over like 1 million views, one over 2 million. And it's like they're just kind of like joking around. Like it's just like they're talking about sports. And it's just so funny because I've spent all this time building this up, and now these two knuckleheads are just like going crazy.
Is there symmetry there? I follow you. Like I'm sure you're seeing likes come from me and stuff like that and comments when I can. But do you talk it out? Is there some structure there? Because the other day I'm sitting there watching and I see you and your wife talk about your favorite sports movies. And then I
Yeah.
check into my favorite two little dudes and they're
Yeah.
talking about sports movies too. Like, do you guys actually, my wife and I literally constantly, I have to tell her sometimes to back off a little bit because she's so ingratiated in this, which is wonderful. But we talk things through and like, hey, let's maybe cover this. And she'll talk to me about guests and say that, there's connections with these other guys. So we'll make sure that you're mentioning that. Are you sitting there? Are you guys having a meeting of the minds between the four of you?
No. So the only thing that I plan for, I give them a mystery question that someone from TikTok or Instagram has asked. And it's usually like something completely absurd that a kid would never know the answer to. It's like a philosophical question. And that one went over 1 million views. So that's the thing that I plan. But then
Okay.
other than that, they sit there and they just are like, let's talk about the World Cup soccer. And they write it down and it's on like these little sheets of paper. And like, I'm
That's
not even
awesome.
in the room. I just go upstairs again and it's not even that long. They do it for like 10 minutes. And
It's
then
it's
I just kind
perfect.
of cut it up. And I will say, like, I don't know how well it would do if like I released the full podcast because there is like downtime where they're like, you know what I mean? But it's amazing. I'm just kind of at a loss for like, I don't know what to do with it because especially from the mental health angle, like there are some jerks out there who are like saying mean stuff about them, but there's also a ton of people like saying awesome stuff. And our kids don't see it because we don't let them have phones or anything like that. But I know like they may catch wind of it and things like that. And so I'm kind of at like a loss for like, what should we do? Like, I know they have something, but it's like, how do you kind of maximize that in a way without them getting hurt in a way?
And what do you think you've learned from that? That maybe if there's other parents out there and some of their kids are, inquiring about doing something like this, what have you learned that you could pass on as far as advice to other parents out there?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like I'm learning on the fly. And one of the things, like I tell my son, like, I'm like, listen, this is good training he's a pretty good athlete. And I think he's got potential to be a pretty good athlete. And I'm like, this is pretty good training for like, what you're going to hear when when you're playing and you're out on the floor and people are going to be yelling and screaming stuff at you. You got to be able to just like let it go. Like that was one of the things I loved the most. I loved when I would get like the heat from other opponents' crowds. Like it
Yeah,
almost fueled me, or like I
sure.
would just ignore it. But I think you get this. This is kind of good training ground for that. I guess that's how I'm like phrasing it to them. But I don't. Again, I'm kind of at a loss for what to do. Like I don't know if we need to get someone to like help us out in a way. I don't know. And maybe it's nothing. Maybe it doesn't evolve into anything. But like it just in the past month, it's evolved.
Yeah, it has. Yeah, it
Yeah,
has. It's I don't know. As somebody that's sort of new into the game, I think it's, when I played sports, and baseball was always my game, but when I played sports, like you could tell it, a kid would just start playing and then he just sort of had it, and
yeah,
then for myself, I started tossing a baseball around with my dad when I was like 4 years old. So baseball was always so natural, but just to see somebody that never played jump in and they can do it so well, I would always talk to them, and just to try to see if I can learn some things, gather some things. Yeah, these two boys, they just got it. I mean, I don't know what
yeah,
it is, but they got it, and
yeah.
I think that's pretty cool.
Well,
You
and they got it. They got it like in a way where, especially like Henry's got just like I knew, like he is like an old soul. Like he comes
Yes, he
over
is.
to our house and just comes and talks to us. But Jimmy like has been like a good counterbalance to him, and it kind of they work together in a way that like Yeah, it seems like they've been doing it forever and they have no training. Hey, they have no idea what they're doing. And I think that's why people like it because it is, like a homegrown thing.
Well, as far as this format that we're both sort of utilizing, that authenticity is the key. And, it's kind of hard not to tell a kid not to be authentic because that's just what they know how to be.
Yeah.
And Henry exudes that authenticity. Jimmy, I don't want to discount Jimmy V. Your
Yeah.
boy's
Yeah.
great. But boy, oh boy, Henry, it is. And it's such a cool yin and yang. You certainly have said that and stuff. I can even see, I'm sure in their friend circles that they have that yin and yang kind of
Yes.
extended through that as well. You found us, I thought it was pretty interesting. I had interviewed another guest and you had kind of reached out to me like, hey, can I use this? It was a component where he was, I think, referencing you and stuff like that. Can you talk a little bit about somebody that I think we both admire and respect quite a bit and somebody that's not running small, shall we say? Can you talk about
Yeah.
Chris?
Yeah. Walking Tall Chris. I think he contacted me and then I heard his story or I kind of looked into it and I was like, oh my God, this is an amazing story. And then I went to his condo and we did a podcast and he was great. I like people who can use humor, even in dark humor and dark ways. And he has the ability to do that. I was super impressed that he was talking about being, a survivor of a mass
Yep.
shooting,
Yep.
but still coming out on top and kind of how he went about doing that and how he was kind of like me. He was stubborn for a while where he didn't get the help that he needed right away. And then eventually he did. And now he's kind of come out on top. And now it's kind of morphed into, he does his auctioneer stuff, which I
Yep.
think is awesome as well.
Hail, hail.
Yeah, I'm guessing people watching him would never know that he was a part of something so traumatic. And, I'm a big supporter of his.
One of the proudest interviews I've ever done because a lot of the feedback I received from people after interviewing him was that both of us were able to kind of inject humor into the interview, even though obviously it was such a heavy interview and stuff. But I've got nothing but love and respect for that guy.
Yeah.
And he happens to love my favorite band. We shared that. If you watch it, you understand who that is. And his Hail Hail auction, that's a song from Pearl Jam, and he's always constantly putting different things from Pearl Jam in there. When you were in college and the depression hit and your struggles started, if you can kind of look back now, and I think this might be really good for young men and young women that maybe are dealing with stuff like that. If you can look back now and say to yourself, maybe if I took this step or that step along the way, maybe I would have been able to kind of navigate through that. What sort of advice, I guess, would you give to an 18-year-old Jim?
Yeah, I think the big thing is just knowledge and awareness. I had no idea. We didn't have any guest speakers come in our health classes. They didn't talk about mental health, I think, beyond just self-esteem. I think if I had any sort of knowledge, I would have at least considered listening to my college coach who suggested it, but I didn't. And, I didn't know how to get help. And I think that's kind of what I'm trying to do now is I always say, I'm just a gym teacher. I am not the mental health professional, but I'm trying to be the one that convinces you to go to that professional if you need it. But if you don't know and you don't know the signs and the symptoms and I didn't even know it was a thing. I didn't know depression was a thing. So I didn't know how to get help. I guess what I would say to young people is there are ways to get help and it doesn't necessarily, it could be medication, it could be therapy, it could be just self-care. That's been the biggest thing for me is prevention. I would always just, react. I would get really down and then I would react. I would get better. But then I realized I needed to prevent it from happening. And the ways that I've been able to do that, just doing this right now, this is one of those forms of prevention for me. Just talking about it, going up and speaking in front of people. It's a self-care type thing, exercising, all those things. But if you don't know what can happen, it's kind of hard to understand that.
Absolutely. There's got to be someone that sort of stands out. I do not want you to give a name whatsoever. Okay. But there's got to be somebody that stands out. And I'm sure, Jim, with all the beautiful things that you're doing, I know you have many examples. So just kind of pick one. But can you think of somebody that, maybe approached you that you never would have thought did, and that you see that just by you being, a lot of times it's just being present for others, quite frankly.
Mhm.
A lot of times it's just listening. And then, if you listen, you process, and you can kind of like respond accordingly and point them in the right direction. But can you think of somebody that, that even today you're like, man, I really was at the right place at the right time. And I know that I was able to kind of provide the right advice.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I keep doing this. Is it happens all the time, either in the moment where someone comes up to me right away, or years later I get a email or a letter or something on one of my social media. And one of the biggest one was after the first time that I ever spoke at my school. 4 years later, I stepped down from coaching because I had been really struggling, and I got an email from a girl, and I still have never met her. And I got a similar email from her mother later on. And like the top of the email just said, "You saved my life." And it went on to be like, I was there the first time that you presented at Conant. I was really struggling. I didn't know how to handle it. I didn't know what it was. You saved my life. And then her mom, like a year later, sent me a similar thing saying, "You saved my daughter's life." And to me, like I always say, like I've had a lot of good feelings in the world, won some big games as a coach and a
Mm,
player. You know,
Reach.
obviously the birth of my children, and I always said the marriage to my lovely wife.
You
Besides,
better. You
yeah,
better.
besides those, there has been no better feeling in the world than someone saying, "You saved my life," or "You changed my life." And since I've been doing this, I've had it happen. Like, "Save my life," I've heard about 5 times,
Oh,
but
it's
"change
beautiful.
my life," I've heard that over and over again. And all I'm doing is like being vulnerable and sharing my story. But it's been connecting with people, and it's one of the reasons why I keep doing it. Like I said, I always say share selfishly. Like I share my story. It is to help those people. But when I hear stuff like that truly helps me as well. And that's that 10% of the reason why.
Beautiful stuff, Jim. First off, if your first name was math, you'd be a math teacher. The second thing is you are a gym teacher, GYM, not JIM, I assume.
Yes.
Third thing, I know you have the Maley Way. You could always have your wife do a form and call it the Femaley Way. I've been thinking about that forever.
I
Wanted to
like that.
share that with you.
I
Uh,
like that. She should.
yes, she should definitely do so. But when I worked with the DCFS kids and I worked at a residential treatment facility and stuff, and I did have a lot of kids kind of, you know, create a nice relationship with me, that they would share things with me that they weren't even sharing with their therapist. And I just remember walking out of there a lot of times going, I am so lucky that I'm here right now for this kid at this moment, right?
Mhm.
And although I want all females and all women and girls to be healthy mentally as well, I grew up at least a decade before you did, and I'll tell you, men would just sort of eat it. Men would just sort of take it. Men would just sort of, I mean, I remember playing football and getting concussed and telling them to rub some dirt in
Yeah.
it and jump back in the game.
Yeah.
And as far as seeking help, that was, you were considered weak. And I'm somebody that studied psychology in my undergraduate studies. So I'm the last person that thinks that way. And I think what you're doing is you're really creating a platform to really strengthen young men in particular. And I think it's so valid. So thank
Thank
you
you.
so much for spending some time with us here, Jim. Thank you so much for being who you are. You're really leaving this world a better place. And we're really happy that you were able to share your story on the Ill Noise Business Playbook. So thank you so much, Jim.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
You got it. Go White Sox. You have a good
Yes.
one, okay?
You too.
You got it.